Subcommittee on Federal Lands will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the state of our nation's federal forests. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be allowed to participate in today's hearing from the dais: the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Hageman, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Min. Without objection, so ordered. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3, Parent O. Without objection, so ordered. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to begin by welcoming Chief Tom Schultz to the subcommittee. Chief Schultz, thank you for being here today. Your leadership, along with the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Rollins, is a breath of fresh air. We appreciate you serving in this role and look forward to your insights as we discuss the importance of making our nation's federal forests healthy and resilient again. I would add productive. Folks, it's time to get back to basics. We know what needs to be done to stop the current wildfire and forest health crisis afflicting our federal lands. As you can see from the chart behind me, when we stopped managing our forests, wildfires increased exponentially. During the previous administration, billions of dollars were spent running the Forest Service into the ground instead of getting people out into the field to do the work. Millions of precious taxpayer dollars were wasted writing unnecessary reports on old growth or settling lawsuits with radical environmental NGOs. In fact, despite receiving $12 billion under the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure bill, the Forest Service actually reduced the number of acres it planned to manage to address wildfire risks. I imagine my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will spend most of their time today claiming that the sky is falling due to proposed budget cuts at the Forest Service. But I want us to be very clear-eyed about the fiscal house that Chief Schultz inherited from the Biden-Harris administration. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from E&E News from January of this year entitled, "Litany of Problems Awaits Forest Service Leaders in 2025. Without objection, so ordered. This article stated that the Forest Service enters the new year with an array of headaches, worsening wildfires, destructive storm damage to southeast forests, and a budget gap so deep that the agency's stopped hiring seasonal workers to help maintain its 193 million acres of forest. And if history is a guide, Forest Service Chief Randy Moore will soon hand off those challenges to a successor. So you'll forgive me if I'm skeptical about what my friends on the other side of the aisle will say about budget cuts or staffing reductions when political leadership under the Biden-Harris administration blew a $750 million hole in this agency's budget that was so bad they had to freeze hiring in September of 2024. Luckily, those days are over. Under the leadership of President Trump, we are returning fiscal sanity to all levels of government and focusing on this agency's core mission, managing our forests. This change in leadership couldn't be coming at a more pivotal moment. Improving the health of our nation's forests and breaking the cycle of catastrophic wildfire are among the most urgent issues facing our federal lands. The scale of this crisis cannot be overstated. Year after year, communities, particularly in the West, are forced to endure the devastation of wildfires, continuing to grow in size and severity. Fires that would undeniably be mitigated with better forest management. Encouragingly, the Trump administration has taken immediate steps to begin to turn the tide against this crisis and restore health to our nation's extremely volatile lands. In March, the immediate expansion of American timber production executive order was issued directing the Forest Service to use tools such as Good Neighbor Authority, stewardship contracting, and Tribal Forest Protection Act agreements to increase timber production and sound forest management. This executive order also directed the Forest Service to increase timber targets, streamline permitting for timber production, and remove or revise bureaucratic impediments delaying work from getting done. In June, the Trump administration announced that it will be rescinding the Clinton-era roadless rule, which has been one of the main impediments to responsible forest management for over 20 years. This misguided rule has effectively locked up more than 58 million acres across the nation from active management. These restrictions severely limit the Forest Service from carrying out necessary mitigation treatments, and impede access for firefighters as they battle wildland fires. The President's budget proposal offers a strategic restructuring of federal wildfire management and a needed reorientation of the Forest Service back to producing timber, providing recreational access, and supporting its multiple use mandate across 193 million acres of public land. While these goals are encouraging, it will be important to ensure funding decisions actually result in more active management, especially when it comes to hazardous fuels reduction. I'd also like to note that the Trump administration's fiscal year 2026 budget requests $6.55 billion for wildland fire management, a roughly $250 million increase over fiscal year 2025 enacted levels. But as I stated earlier, money alone cannot solve this problem. I hope we can also discuss today how this committee can provide additional legislative tools and relief through legislation like the Fix Our Forests Act to streamline environmental reviews and reduce frivolous lawsuits. I want to once again thank Chief Schultz for being here. We are committed to working with you and your agency on common sense solutions, and we look forward to hearing more from you today. With that, I will now recognize Ranking Member Neguse for his opening statement.
I thank the ranking member, or excuse me, I thank the chairman for his paneling of this important hearing today. And I want to say to Chief Schultz, thank you for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Also appreciated the opportunity to visit with you prior to this hearing several months ago, and certainly appreciated the fact that we could have an open and transparent dialogue about our nation's federal forests. It won't surprise you, Chief, to hear that I am completely unfamiliar with the description of the Forest Service that my friend, the chairman from Wisconsin, just described. There were references to fiscal sanity, the notion that the Forest Service is operating, better than it has ever before. That is entirely contradicted by the factual record and the realities that we have heard on the ground in Western Colorado, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in greater detail today. Since Donald Trump reassumed office in January, the Forest Service has lost thousands of career experts who've taken the deferred resignation or early retirement programs. In addition to the thousands of employees who've been thrown into uncertainty as they've been unceremoniously fired and then rehired. By the way, I think, as the chairman well understands, 1,400 of these people were red card holders. Probably not the smartest idea to have them leave the agency in advance of wildfire season in the Rocky Mountain West and across the western United States. Hard-pressed to describe that as anything resembling sanity. Many agency staff fear more firings to come, especially with USDA's proposed reorganization plan that creates even more uncertainty for Forest Service employees. Now, I will say, and it's certainly something that I think is important to concede, my office has heard for years about the Forest Service's chronic understaffing. Even before January, the Forest Service's workforce was nearly 30% less than it was 3 decades ago, even as visitation and wildfire risk have dramatically increased over that same time frame. And yet, the draconian budget cuts that have been proposed by the Trump administration, if they ultimately became law, would result in a 40%, nearly 40% decrease in staff at the Forest Service from 2004 levels. I understand that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are very impassioned about timber production. Unclear to me how they intend to have any of these permits or leases or contracts executed when there is no staff at the Forest Service to do it. At the end of the day, this is simple math. Cutting the workforce by nearly 40%, juxtaposed to fiscal year 2024 levels, is not common sense policy. It is dangerous, and it will have enormous implications. It cannot be justified as simply promoting efficiency or cutting waste and fraud. Stripping the Forest Service for parts threatens the safety of communities in the wildland-urban interface for whom fire is an enormous concern. The folks that I represent. I have the privilege of representing 3 national forests in western Colorado: the Arapahoe Roosevelt, the White River, the Route National Forest. They are struggling. And I don't buy it for a second. My colleagues, I guess we'll hear from them today, but insofar as they may suggest, particularly those who represent western states, that there isn't a crisis looming for the Forest Service in their respective jurisdictions, I just don't buy that that's not the case. It is contradicted by the facts on the ground. I am concerned by the continued hiring freeze at the agency. I would encourage you, Mr. Chief, to end this freeze in order to adequately staff the Forest Service, meet its responsibilities to the American people. I share the outrage that I've heard from constituents in Colorado and beyond about this administration's attacks on the Forest Service, its employees, the grant programs, the land management efforts, and again, the agency's world-class wildfire response efforts. I truly believe, I think the Forest Service is one of the crown jewels of our federal government. And I would urge my colleagues, insofar as they may share that same view, to work with us in good faith to support the Forest Service, not to decimate it, which is what's happening right now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you to the ranking member. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Westerman, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, and thank you, Chief Schultz, for being here today to discuss the state of our nation's federal forest. You know, it's always comforting to have another forester in the room, and I know that you certainly have your work cut out for you as you address the issues that we face, but also know that your background and your commitment to responsible land management and conservation are what I think we need at this time to make sure that our forests are healthier going forward. You know, the topic of today's hearing is the state of our nation's federal forest, and frankly, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that our federal forests are in dire condition. I don't think anybody would really argue with that. There are over 117 million acres of federal land at high or very high risk of wildfires, representing nearly 1/5 of the land overseen by our federal land management agencies. We've been confronted with the sobering reality of this wildfire and forest health crisis head-on this year as we watch the city of Los Angeles go up in flames in January. Too often we measure the wildfire crisis in acres burned, but this year is a tragic reminder that the cost of wildfire goes far beyond mere statistics. Entire towns with homes, schools, churches, grocery stores, parks, and more are reduced to rubble. Some of the smoke plumes from these megafires look like a nuclear bomb has gone off. Everyday citizens and wildland firefighters are getting put into harm's way, and tragically, many have passed away. Lahaina, Paradise, Los Angeles, every year we're watching more and more communities burn to the ground, and we're doing nothing about it. That's to say nothing of the wildlife habitat getting turned into moonscapes, millions of metric tons of carbon getting released into the atmosphere, and degraded water quality. Families who have saved up and look forward to vacationing in parks like Yosemite would be met this week not with stunning views of Half Dome, but with smoke-filled haze. You know and I know that we can do better than this, and that we have to do better than this. We don't have to accept the reality that our federal forests are nothing more than ticking time bombs waiting to explode whenever it's hotter or drier than normal. We can't prevent a tornado or a hurricane, but we can prevent a wildfire. Fortunately, there is growing bipartisan consensus backed by science that we need to rapidly increase the pace and scale of forest management activities to improve the health of our nation's forests, reduce catastrophic wildfires, and protect communities. I believe we have the bill just to do that. The Fix Our Forest Act is a comprehensive bipartisan forestry package that will provide our agencies with critical tools to implement the most vital forest management projects, and to do that immediately. This legislation, which is a product of years of hard work and collaboration, will expedite environmental analysis, facilitate better state, tribal, and local collaboration, and advance new innovative wildfire technologies. The Fix Our Forest Act, as you know, has already passed out of the House with strong bipartisan support and is working its way through the Senate. It's critically important that we get this legislation passed. I'm also looking forward to working in a bipartisan and bicameral basis and with the Trump administration to pass legislation reauthorizing the Great American Outdoors Act. Just a few days ago, the committee traveled to Grand Teton National Park to hold an oversight hearing on the Great American Outdoors Act. Now, I will say that's a beautiful place, but at times you couldn't even see the Grand Tetons because of smoke that had settled in over the valley there. While that hearing focused on our parks, we know that more Americans than ever are choosing to recreate on our national forest. Investments made by GOA are critical to giving our national forests the recreational infrastructure investments needed to welcome millions of visitors for America's 250th birthday celebrations next year. In anticipation of America's 250th anniversary, it's also critically important that the Forest Service fully implements the Explore Act, which is bipartisan recreation that passed both the House and the Senate unanimously. Folks in my district love to hunt, fish, hike, bike, camp, and float on our public lands and waters, and the Explore Act helps open up these recreation opportunities. I look forward to working with your agency on the implementation of Explore, particularly provisions restoring overnight camping in the Ouachita National Forest. Finally, I'd like to commend you and Secretary Rollins and President Trump for refocusing our land managers on their core multiple-use mandates. There have been 2 forestry-related executive orders issued so far to increase timber targets, address regulatory delays, confront bureaucratic blockades, support local collaboration, encourage the use of innovative technology. Now, you and I know that to manage our forest responsibly for forest health and resiliency, that we have to have strong markets. Just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published an article talking about the low lumber prices and the weak lumber markets, and I'm seeing it in my district where mills are closing, and they're closing across the country. We've got to do something to get stronger markets, both for saw logs and for residual materials. And I know with the Forest Products Lab and your work that hopefully we will be working on issues that can better not only the housing market, but also those markets for residuals. The biggest thing I think facing home buyers right now are high prices created by inflation from spending in the previous administration, as well as high interest rates that are a result of high inflation. So we got a lot of work to do in that area. Again, look forward to your testimony and to the questions that follow. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Chief. It's good to see you again. I want to associate myself with Ranking Member Neguse in thanking you for proactively setting up some outreach meetings. It may seem like just a meet and greet when you came to my office, but it actually means a lot, I think, when we have face-to-face conversations. I think it's good for the people we serve. I think it's good for the institution. You are still the only Trump administration official to do that with me. And so I think it speaks to your style of leadership, and it's something that I definitely appreciate. Unfortunately, I also share the ranking member's concerns about the lack of support right now for our federal firefighting workforce. We are facing longer, more intense fire seasons. That is the reality. I hope we still aren't fighting about the reality of climate change. Anyone who works in this field will tell you that this is not politics or ideology. This is just reality. Growing health threats, especially from repeated smoke exposure, are a huge problem. And firefighters are being forced to navigate significant disruption and uncertainty as this administration pursues its various agency reorganization plans and chaotic reshuffling schemes across land management agencies. The challenges go beyond just workforce neglect. We should talk about this administration's proposed budget. I just don't see how it works for President Trump to propose a staggering overall cut of 76% to the agency's budget at a time when wildfire threats are growing, when workloads are expanding, communities all over the country are depending more than ever on the agency's capacity to respond. And at the same time, the administration has been working overtime to turn our public lands over to corporate profiteers. Shortly after he took office, President Trump began issuing all of these imperial edicts. One of them steamrolls public input and dramatically ramps up logging across national forests by proposing sweeping nationwide timber sale mandates. And soon after that, Secretary Rollins laid the groundwork for even more giveaways while silencing public input from everyday Americans about timber sales in the public lands in their own communities. And this, of course, is by declaring a so-called state of emergency in our national forests. I think we now have a state of emergency declared for just about everything, including stamp collecting. But when you combine that with the administration's recent attacks on NEPA, the result is clear. This is about less power for everyday Americans to shape decisions on our shared public lands. And on top of that, Secretary Rollins has announced her intent to put millions of acres of national forests literally on the chopping block by rolling back the roadless rule. And the reckless move of doing that would open the floodgates of clear cutting, road building, and mining across some of the last intact, undeveloped forests that we have left in this country. This is reckless, Mr. Chief. It's something that well, let me just say, some of you may know that I'm a fisherman. I spend a lot of time on public lands and waters. And I can say that the roadless areas are essential headwater and backcountry landscapes. These are the places where development has not yet carved things up and split things apart. They keep ecosystems connected. They safeguard cold water streams for fish and wildlife, provide world-class hunting and fishing opportunities, and supply clean drinking water to numerous American communities. This is the heart of our natural infrastructure in this country. And the case for the roadless rule is not just ecological, it is fiscal. The roadless rule was adopted in part to stop the wave of unnecessary and fiscally irresponsible road construction in our national forests. Projects that the American taxpayer ends up footing the bill for. If you listen to Taxpayers for Common Sense, which has been working on this for years, they found that nearly 370,000 miles of roads crisscrossing our national forests have resulted in $5.9 billion in road maintenance backlog for the taxpayers. Secretary Rollins' announcement cited a wildfire crisis as the reason to allow more roads in the national forest, but here's what she left out. The original 2001 roadless rule already allows road construction for wildfire response. This repeal is not about forest health, it's not about wildfire response, it's about clearing the way for more logging and mining for corporate profits, and that should be unacceptable. Mr. Chief, I look forward to the conversation. I am proud of the work that Democrats did a few years ago to make major investments through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, historic investments in wildfire prevention, hazardous fuels reduction, community planning, to support resiliency. I have been dismayed the way my colleagues across the aisle have attacked these forward-looking investments, but I hope we'll have a chance with you, and especially your openness to dialogue, to continue working on getting it right. I look forward to hearing from you, Chief. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. We'll now move on to witness testimony. Let me remind our witness that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the on button on the microphone. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. At the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I would now like to introduce Mr. Tom Schultz, Chief of the U.S. Forest Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Chief Schultz, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Neguse, thank you for having me here today to present the Department's views on the state of our nation's federal forests. I was speaking today from the perspective of the National Forest System. The United States has an abundance of timber resources that are more than adequate to meet our domestic timber production needs, but federal policies have prevented the full utilization of these resources, hindering effective forest management on our forest systems. Americans, especially those in western United States, worry that overgrown forests pose significant wildfire risks to their families, homes, and communities. They also worry about losing jobs or livelihoods. We've seen mill closures, a problem that can be traced directly to lack of federal timber supply and the certainty around that supply. Years of declining harvests, litigation, cumbersome permitting and planning processes, alongside with other factors, have left the national forest at a significant risk of wildfire, insect and disease outbreaks, in an overall state of disrepair. This administration, with the bold leadership of President Trump and Secretary Rollins, is taking decisive action to correct this dangerous situation and bring us back to a stable and proper course. The 2023 National Wildfire Potential Report identifies more than 66 million acres of National Forest System lands under high or very high risk, and over 78 million acres of system lands that are experiencing at-risk insect and disease infestations. This is a full-blown wildfire and forest health crisis. Without action, these conditions are expected to get worse. The administration rightly recognized the urgency that is needed to address the threat of wildfire that it poses to over 70,000 communities across our nation. Through executive action, the President has made it clear that forest management and wildfire risk reduction projects can help protect American lives and communities and ensure that Americans prosper. Secretary Rollins has also committed to managing our forests in a manner that will reduce wildfire risk, provide stable domestic supply of timber, create jobs, improve wildlife habitat, and unleash numerous other benefits. Through her memorandum, the Secretary has established an emergency situation determination on more than 112 million acres of National Forest System lands, empowering local land managers to take necessary steps to address the risks of fire, insects, and disease. The Secretary further catalyzed positive change by proposing to repeal the 2001 roadless rule. For nearly 25 years, this rule has frustrated land managers and has served as a barrier to action. This effort, affecting 45 million acres of National Forest System lands, is intended to return local decision-making to the leaders and the boots on the ground who are closest to the communities that we serve. We know how important access is for the communities that we serve. Many of you talked about this. Trends indicate continued growth in outdoor recreation. An estimated 163 million recreational visits to national forests and grasslands in fiscal year 23 contributed to rural economies, supporting an estimated 167,000 jobs, $16 billion in gross domestic product. I am pleased to report that as we continue to make progress on the Great American Outdoors Act, the Legacy Restoration Fund, which was signed into law by President Trump in 2020. To date, we have completed 434 infrastructure projects to improve public access while resolving more than $200 million of deferred maintenance. 178 of these projects have improved the agency's transportation system, providing access for active management, firefighting, and recreational activities. Approximately 800 additional projects are currently underway. Once completed, these projects will have addressed more than $1 billion in deferred maintenance. Consistent with President Trump's 2026 budget request, a bipartisan group of senators has introduced legislation to extend the Legacy Restoration Fund. As more Americans connect with the great outdoors, I'm excited about the opportunities before us. Wildfire. Accelerating our active management and reviving the timber industry is one part of wildfire management. Under President Trump and Secretary Rollins' leadership, the Forest Service has the largest, most prepared wildland firefighting force in the world. We successfully put out 98% of wildfires during initial attack, keeping them smaller than 100 acres so that they don't threaten communities or require large amounts of resources. As of September 9th, 2025, there were over 5,108 fires on the National Forest System lands this year, which have burned approximately 923,000 acres. We respond to every fire quickly and decisively with a risk-based containment strategy that matches the threats. Firefighters are trained to fight fire aggressively, having provided for safety first. There is one area that we need help today in order to maintain a quick response, and that is to adjust the cap on the amount that our firefighters are paid each year. With the pay cap in place, firefighters either choose not to deploy or are forced to repay any amounts that they make beyond the cap. My ask is for you all today to consider immediately working on a pay cap waiver for these brave men and women. If we wait until the end of the fiscal year, operational readiness may be impacted. Our team is ready to work with your offices on this. Looking forward, President Trump has directed the entire federal government to take immediate action to protect people, communities, and the natural resources of our country through executive order. In service to the President's vision, and the agency is working closely with the Department of Interior to identify where we can create more efficiency within the firefighting force and evaluating where consolidations make sense. In closing, President Trump and Secretary Rollins have directed the Forest Service to continue to focus on increasing active management, which includes timber production as well as grazing management, while also reducing wildfire risk to protect all Americans. The agency's goal is to return to basics and to prioritize active management. The department is committed to meeting the President's vision to increase domestic timber production and streamline federal policies to enhance forest management and reduce wildfire risks. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chief Schultz. I'll now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions. First, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, an untended forest is no different than an untended garden. It's going to grow and grow until it chokes itself to death, and then it's going to fall victim to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic fire. That's how nature gardens. She doesn't care that it takes a century or more for a forest to regrow. Nature's got all the time in the world. It's we mortals that care. So a century ago, we formed the U.S. Forest Service to do the gardening. Every year, we'd send out foresters to mark off excess timber. We'd then auction it off to logging companies who would pay us to remove it. A quarter of the revenues from these federal timber auctions went back to the local governments that were directly impacted by the public lands. The other 3/4 went back into our forests through the Forest Service. But beginning in the 1970s, we began passing laws that have made forest management infinitely time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. It now takes an average of nearly 5 years to conduct an environmental study for forest thinning projects, costing millions of dollars, often more than the value of the timber. So instead of making money to remove excess timber, it now costs us money, so not a lot of it gets done. Now, the left promised us that this would improve the forest environment. Well, after 50 years of this folly, I think we're entitled to ask, how's the forest environment doing? Since 1980, we've seen roughly an 80% decline in timber harvested off the federal lands and a concomitant increase in forest acres destroyed by fire. Chairman showed us one chart. I think we've got another one here that makes that point even more clearly. In this last decade, we've lost nearly a quarter, actually slightly more than a quarter of our national forests to catastrophic fire, including many of the habitats that the ideologues say they want to preserve. So I would suggest those who've advocated these policies over these years should hang their heads in shame. Now, Director Schultz, we got a categorical exclusion from NEPA for forest thinning projects in the Tahoe Basin. It has taken the environmental review process from 5 years down to a few months. It's taken the environmental reports from 800 pages down to a few dozen. It's increased the federal timber harvest on the Tahoe Basin from 1 million board feet a year to 9 million board feet a year. It has tripled the amount of treated acreage since that was enacted in 2016, and it is what saved the city of South Lake Tahoe from the Caldor fire. The fire hit a tract treated under that authority, it lay down, and the firefighters were able to put it out. So my first question to you is, do we need more money or do we need fewer regulations?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Clintock, thank you for the question. I think the answer to your question, I think it's intuitive that we are trying to streamline process in many cases in order to be more effective in deployment of both our land management opportunities as well as our firefighting opportunities. So yes, I mean, I think your question, do we need more money or do we need a more efficient process? We're focused on creating a more efficient process. So the administration has directed a review of the NEPA process that we're going through. We've updated NEPA regulations to simplify that process, make it more efficient. There's looking at more categorical exclusions that are adopted throughout the agency. But in particular, the Tahoe Basin that you referenced, I was out there about 2.5 months ago. We specifically talked about this and how effective that CE has been.
We are trying to get that policy extended throughout our national forests, and it's being opposed by the people on that side of this dais, and I think that's a shame. And you know, they tell us what is climate change, but you can literally tell, as you know, tell the boundaries between the public and private lands in the Sierra just by looking at the condition of the forests. I think it's very clever of the climate to know exactly what those boundaries are and to only decimate the public lands. But private owners make money keeping their forests in excellent condition. The government now loses money keeping our forests in decrepit condition. We used to run the entire Forest Service simply from the proceeds of these federal timber auctions. Can we get back to those days, and how?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McClintock, we're working to get back to those days. Yes, sir.
The leftist mantra is that it's because of decades of fire suppression, and if we just let the fires burn frequently, they'll be less intense, but they miss the other half of the equation. All that excess timber is going to come out in two ways. It's either carried out by us or nature will burn it out. If we're going to stop nature from doing the burning, then we have to do the carrying, and that's what we stopped doing. Is that essentially your assessment?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McClintock, that's accurate. You know, we need to manage the land effectively to reduce fire hazards. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you. My speaker's not working. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Schultz, for joining us today. I appreciate comments about the importance of raising the cap on wildland firefighters. I will point out that Representative Neguse this morning sought an amendment to do just that, and every single Republican said no. So I suggest you talk to the Republicans in Congress about taking on that issue, because every single Republican voted against our wildland firefighters this morning. I want to also talk to you about the importance of rural and tribal communities in terms of the relationship with the Forest Service and the work that we need to get done. As you know, in New Mexico, there have been 4 controlled or managed fires that have escaped and done great harm to the people of New Mexico, to the land for which they have cared for centuries, not decades, not my grandfather, but centuries. And the Forest Service needs to rebuild its trust. But the way you rebuild trust is communication. And you cannot have communication if you don't have people for my people to talk to. Like my gente, my ranchers and farmers and land grants, they need somebody to talk to. And we don't know if there are enough people on the ground. Chief Schultz, do you know whether the Santa Fe National Forest, Carson National Forest, and the Southwest Regional Office are staffed at the same levels as they were this time in 2024?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no, they're not staffed at the same level that they were last year at this time.
Right. And I think that this is the problem. I would love, because we keep hearing from above high that, oh, they're all staffed. And I need to say, you're the first one who's actually admitted in that witness stand that they're not. We would love to see the exact personnel data. You don't need to give us the names, but the staffing vacancies. And I'd love it if you would provide that data to to the committee. I wanted to go to the fact that the fiscal year 26 Forest Service budget zeroes out essential functions like the state, private, and tribal forestry program, because the management we're talking about and the different work that gets done, it has to be done in collaboration and cooperation with the landowners around the federal government, which includes tribal, state, and private landowners. Everybody needs to work together. A bark beetle is not going to pay attention to say, I'm not going to go over there because it's forest land, right, federal. A fire is not going to pay attention to a boundary. We need to all work together. I'd point out the landscape scale restoration program reaches across jurisdictions to restore wildfire risk, to do some of the work we're talking about. But your budget puts this innovative program and others on the chopping block. Thank heaven, Republican working with Democrats in the appropriation recognized the value, and proposed funding it, slightly below 25 levels, but they proposed funding it. So if we fund this, despite the fact that your budget said zero it out, if we fund this, if Congress funds this, do you commit to spend it as directed by Congress?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, we will spend what's appropriate for us to spend in the budget, and we'll coordinate that through the administration. I mean, that's how we work our budget. We don't just spend money without working through our discussions with the administration as well as what's appropriated by Congress.
But when Congress says, when the administration says, we don't want to spend a dime on tribal state programs on the forest, even though we had the budget before, I mean, this was some $283 million, right? But you say we don't want to spend a dime of this 283, isn't it Congress who controls the purse, and the administration needs to spend that money?
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman, I think what we're doing right now is we're going through the budgeting process, and we have a proposed president's budget. Obviously, Congress will act as they do, and we will perform the job that was expected for us to perform.
You know, the budget justification for zeroing it out was efficiencies. The reality is if you don't take care of the forest in advance, it's going to cost you a whole lot more money when you have to fight a fire on those lands. And with that, I will yield back.
Generally yields. I would just point out in regards to every Republican voting against, which was mentioned early there, that was in the Rules Committee. It was no one here on the dais.
Oh,
So-
sorry, it was, I didn't intend it to be.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I now like to recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Tiffany. Chief Schultz, it's great to see you once again. Following the passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, the executive branch was required to enact NEPA reforms, which the Biden administration refused to do. Luckily, after entering office, President Trump directed executive branch agencies to review and streamline NEPA processes, including ensuring agencies are compliant with the 2023 reforms. Can you please expand upon the Forest Service's work to enact these NEPA reforms, and what steps is the service taking to ensure environmental protection while still fulfilling the multiple use mandate that governs our public lands?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stauber, thanks for the question. So the Department of Agriculture went through a process to review the NEPA regulations that we operate under. And instead of every mission area having their own set of regulations, USDA adopted a single rule set for NEPA. And that was to streamline that process as well as utilize any of the categorical exclusions that may be appropriate for one mission area or another. So that's a process we went through, and those were adopted as interim final regulations on July 3rd. There was a public comment period that closed on July 30th. Currently, that is before CEQ right now to adjudicate all of the public comments that were received in that process. But USDA did move forward per that direction and has gone through that process to review and update the regulations to streamline those and ensure that we have a single set of regulations for all of USDA.
Thank you. Communities across the United States are facing a housing crisis thanks in part to a shortage of housing stock. What role do you envision the Forest Service can play in helping to address the country's housing crisis?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stauber, I think there's a couple things. One, there was actually authorities in the Farm Bill that allow the Forest Service to actually do long-term leases for housing on administrative sites for affordable housing. So that's something we've actually seen, that we've done that in 3 different locations, working through that. There's a location in Colorado, location in Oregon, and a location in Idaho, where we're actually looking at administrative sites for developers to put housing on those sites, existing sites, for affordable housing, both for Forest Service employees and others. In addition to that, I think the other component that we're looking at is how do we increase supply of timber available from the National Forest System to encourage more production of lumber around the country, which theoretically, if we have more production, that could lower the price of lumber for consumers. So I think those are some of the things that we're looking at working toward right now.
First part of your answer was really codifying the EXPLORE Act. Chief Schultz, do you have confidence that the U.S. Forest Service is adequately staffed for wildland firefighting purposes?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stauber, I do feel like we are staffed appropriately.
Several of my colleagues have raised concerns with the Department of non-firefighter personnel that have departed the Forest Service and held red cards, qualifying them to fight wildfires, even if that was not their full-time day job. Can you expand on the impact of these departures? Of those who exited the service and held red cards, how often were those individuals called up to respond to wildfires in recent years?
But Chairman, Mr. Stauber, I appreciate the clarification. So it was stated previously, which is an accurate statement, we had about 1,400 employees that had red cards that did choose to take DRP, which is deferred resignation. Of those 1,400, about 350 had actually been on a fire in the last 5 years. Of those 350 that have been on a fire in the last 5 years, 130 of them have come back to the agency to be on teams this year, and currently 90 of those are on teams as we speak right now.
Thank you. Do you believe Congress has provided the Forest Service with the necessary authorities to address concerns? And how could Congress expand existing authorities, or what kind of new authorities would be helpful to address and make your job successful and the American people?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Stauber, I think we talked earlier about the pay cap issue. That is one immediate that is a concern of ours, that we address that. Another one that's out there is the fire funding fix. There was a lot of discussion about this over the last 3 to 4 years. That expires in 2026, so that's something just to be thinking about on the radar as we go forward. I think some other things that have been discussed earlier, Chairman Westerman talked about the Fix Our Forest Act. There's provisions in there that would be extremely helpful to us as we move forward. There was a discussion on categorical exclusions on the Tahoe Forest, which I think if we could use that beyond just that area, that would be helpful. There's also provisions on managing roads that under Good Neighbor Authority that would be helpful. So I think there's some key elements that are before the committee that have already passed out of this committee, but I think those are some things that we could gain to be benefited through congressional action.
Thank you, Chief Schultz.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neguse, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Schultz, you recorded a video earlier this year in which you asked or encouraged Forest Service employees who were red card holders who had taken the deferred resignation program to rejoin the agency, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Why'd you do that?
We did that because we wanted to make sure that those folks that had those 350 that had
Sure.
historically fought fire, that they had an opportunity to come back and serve us again this summer.
And I'm glad you did it. The reason why I asked, Chief, and this is more directed at my colleague from Minnesota, this ludicrous line of questioning that somehow the deferred resignations were a good thing. I don't care if it's 500, 350, or 50. The notion that the agency would have red card holders that leave en masse right before the wildfire season and now trying to parse through various characterizations about which of those red card holders had worked a fire in the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years is ridiculous. Everyone knows that it was a mistake. That's why the chief, and I agree with his decision, by the way, and I don't think the decision regarding the deferred resignation program was not yours. So I'm not here to cast blame on you, Chief. I think that your decision to record the video and to implore red card holders who had left the agency to come back to help rescue states like Colorado and other states across the West was a good, prudent step. And I'm not really understanding my colleague from Minnesota's attempted clarification. But in any event, I would hope, given your actions, Chief, that you'd agree with me that pursuing another one of these deferred resignation programs in which red card holders are encouraged to leave the agency is not a good idea, right? I mean, I'm hoping you're telling Secretary Rollins and others, look, come next year, let's not do this again, so that you don't have to record videos like the one that you did. Fair?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Neguse, what I can say is that we did not encourage red card holders to leave. That was not the intent of that. The intent was to address our budget shortfall, and we made that available to everyone other than firefighters. So
Okay.
firefighters were not eligible.
Well, I hope the administration does not pursue this again. And if they do pursue it again, I would hope that they would convey to the red card holders in the agency, we're not encouraging you to leave. We don't want you to leave the agency. That would be something that I think would be important for the agency to consider. Mr. Chief Schultz, there's been some recent reporting well, actually, before I get to that issue around toxic smoke exposure, let me just say, I want to say thank you for being willing to come forward and make the case for a pay waiver for our wildland firefighters, the waiver of the statutory cap. I completely agree with you. And as was mentioned, I introduced an amendment, my amendment, this morning in the Rules Committee, and Republicans voted it down. This was an amendment to essentially add this to the NDAA. The House is controlled by Republicans. The Senate is controlled by Republicans. We have a Republican president, a Republican Secretary of Agriculture. You well know. So if my colleagues, there was some snickering earlier when the reference was made to the Rules Committee. Do you agree with the Forest Chief, Forest Service Chief, who serves under a Republican Secretary of Agriculture, who was appointed by President Trump, that we ought to get this pay waiver done? And if you agree, join me and let's get it done, because we're trying. We are trying to do this for our wildland firefighters, and we're not having, it is difficult to get my colleagues to agree. So I just hope that they'll listen to you. Last set of questions is really around toxic smoke exposure, and recent article that I'm sure you're familiar with in the New York Times. And I guess the question I have for you is, has the agency considered, in light of that reporting, and again, I know you're new to the agency relatively, but has the agency considered making PPE available to wildland firefighters? And I'm not talking about a mandate, but just in terms of having availability in the same way that CAL FIRE has done, other states are now considering, and of course, many other Western countries.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Neguse, first of all, in the article, Forest Service employees were interviewed for that, and their input was not included in the article. So I would argue that that article was fairly one-sided, just to clear the record on that. In terms of what we do provide firefighters, N95 masks are available should a firefighter choose to wear that. They're provided on fires. What we do not provide are respirators. And that's something that there's
Can I ask about the mask on that front? And I will, just on the N95 mask. So does the wildland firefighter have to ask for that, or are they now, it's the policy of the Forest Service that they're made aware that they have the ability to access those masks if they choose?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Neguse, yes, they're aware that they are available on fires. As part of when we deploy to a fire, the logistics team, they do order that is available to firefighters. That is N95 masks, not respirators, N95 masks.
And I would just say on that point, I thank the chairman for his indulgence. I think it would be important for the Forest Service, you've done this now during the course of this hearing, but perhaps taking another step to pronounce that very publicly, because that's not the understanding, I think, based off of what we've all collectively read. But I hear you, and so I'd look forward. We sent a letter to you, along with many other members, on this subject that just asks a series of questions to try to get some clarity for our wildland firefighters, and so would hope that we could continue to work with you on
Chairman,
that.
Mr. Goose, and we got your letter yesterday, so we appreciate that, and we will work toward answering those. But we take it very seriously, firefighter health. It was mentioned earlier, too. It's not just physical health in terms of respiration, but also psychological health. So that's something we are very serious about, that we do have suicides occasionally. So firefighter safety is of critical importance to the agency, and we're working with our firefighters to make sure that they are protected and have appropriate PPE to keep them safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Gentleman yields. Stunning that the New York Times didn't get full information for their article. I'd like to recognize a gentleman from Oregon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield to Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. I want to remind my friends on the other side of the aisle, Republicans are the ones who passed the permanent pay raise for firefighters earlier this year. Every Democrat voted no, including the ranking member, and that was in the CR. And I will tell you that, Mr. Chief, you are a breath of fresh air. I appreciate, as the ranking member talked about you met with everybody that I know that requested. We appreciate that public service, and I yield back.
Chief, a couple of questions for you. There's been some assertions that somehow the Forest Service doesn't have enough folks available to fight fire, yet in my district, back in Oregon, which takes up almost 3/4 of the state of Oregon, I have immense amounts of national forest. And I have people calling me who have contracted with the Forest Service over the years to provide help. And they're calling me because they haven't been called yet. They haven't been asked to come and fight fire yet, and that's because they haven't been needed. But they're standing by. They're ready. They want to go to fight fire if needed. And that seems to be glossed over by those who are, not sure, calling out, attacking, whatever the word might be, the removal of red card folk, this ignoring by design the fact that we have people available to fight these fires that are not even being called up yet. So I want to call that out. And by the way, I don't want to wish more fire, but I do wish these people would quit calling me. But the one leads to the other, I suppose. But I'm going to slide away from that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Benz, real quick to your point, though, I just
Yeah,
want
sure.
to clarify that. So we do have contract crews, and that number of crews, Type 2 crews, has grown over the last 10 years from about 400 to 800 Type 2 crews. So what you're hearing from are folks, you're exactly right, that have invested contractors' time on equipment and resources that have not been fully utilized this year. We did have a predicted fire season that was, so far, has been less than what was originally predicted. But, so we do have outside crews in addition to Forest Service employees that do support firefighting efforts.
You do. And while we're on that topic, I've also heard from folks in my district that have been involved with the Forest Service for many, many years, a level of concern about the nature of how the Forest Service contracts with them. And specifically, they're worried about the lowest cost approach as opposed to the long-term high-value approach. And I know that the Forest Service engages in both, and that's fine, I suppose, but can you share with some words of encouragement for those who have spent so much of their time and money getting ready to be available and doing their best to do a really good job, that they won't suddenly be underbid by outside folks coming in from who knows where?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Benz, a couple things there. One, we've heard from the same folks. I hear from them regularly in terms of our contracting procedures. We are looking over the next year of revamping and revising our blanket purchase agreement, which is how we bring those crews on. And you're right, there's ways to look at that. One, you look at their distance to an event or an incident, and you also look at the rate that they've been quoted. So if someone is closer or bids a lower rate, the system pushes them to the top. So we're going to be looking at not just their proximity and the rate that they quote, but also the value. And part of that can be by preseason qualifications and reviewing some of those crews. There used to be a day, we used to, Oregon Department of Forestry used to do some of that work for the Forest Service. They no longer do that. But we're also going to be looking at preseason, what can we do to assess some of the value that is being talked about? So those are things we're working on over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you for that. And there's something that's coming up way too often right now. And even last night in a telephone town hall meeting I was doing, I had a lady call in from, I believe it was the Medford area. Don't quote me on exactly where she's from, but her fire insurance had just been canceled. And her indication was that Farmers Insurance was going to withdraw from Oregon, from supplying any sort of fire insurance. This is extraordinarily bad news for all the obvious reasons. But the question is, what can we do about it? And that we have high-risk categories that people can go into, but that's not the right answer. The right answer would be, how do we drive down risk over the long run? And that driving down of risk would suggest that we need to have a policy of going to where the most houses are and figuring out a way of reducing fuel around them in a way that's consistent with risk reduction, working with insurance companies. Is there someone in the Forest Service that's focusing on this insurance risk reduction issue?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Benz, I think there's a couple things to think about. One is, what can we do in the wildland-urban interface to address the wildfire risk on federal lands? I think the other piece, though, is landowners have their own responsibilities as well. So if you're a forest landowner and you have a home in the forest, you have to take actions to manage your own ground as well. So there's some personal responsibility that goes along with this. And different states have addressed this differently. I know California's got issues where insurance companies have pulled out. Florida's had the issue on hurricanes. We've seen this in North Idaho where you can't get insurance in some places where you live. So part of it is partnering with the right groups. There's a lot of entities out there, nonprofits, that work with landowners directly to help them manage their own ground. They FireWise programs that encourage them what kind of setbacks they need to have for tree removal around their homes. But a big focus is for the Forest Service, both in the wildland-urban interface, where we have federal forest lands that threaten communities, managing those aggressively, and then looking at even beyond just the immediate WUI, what do we need to do to protect communities? And that's a focus for us right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize the gentle lady from Washington, Ms. Randall. Ms. Randall, it was a pleasure to have you up in Alaska with us on the Natural Resources Tour.
It was a delight.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And as the folks who were with me in Alaska heard me chatter about, and many people know, my district is the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, heavily forested district. And there on the Olympic Peninsula, we're currently fighting the largest active fire in Washington State. Another sparked over the weekend, and it's the largest that the Olympic Peninsula has seen in 50 years. The Bear Gulch fire is estimated to be more than 10,000 acres and under 9% currently contained. As you know, wildland firefighting is one of the most dangerous and critical public safety duties, and I applaud the hardworking crew members who put their lives on the line to perform these life-saving duties to make our communities safer for humans and the land. Last month, I had the chance to visit Incident Command at Sanderson Field in Shelton, where we saw the fields of tents where folks come and stay for 2 weeks at a time, then swap out again. It's not just, one set of crew that's doing this work. It's a continuous turnover of folks who are stepping in to keep our community safe. Chief Schultz, my understanding is that as of July 27th, 2025, the Forest Service had 11,364 wildland firefighters on board nationwide. Do you believe that the work that they do is valuable and that we should do everything possible to ensure that they feel safe and protected on the job?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Randall, yes, I do think that you should be protected and safe on the job. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, it seems that some of our federal agencies under the Trump administration don't have the same appreciation for our firefighters, because on August 27th, instead of being able to conduct their critical work, 44 crew members were forced to stand in line for hours to show their IDs to immigration enforcement. Customs and Border Patrol arrested 2 crew members, and dozens more were pulled away from performing fuel management, which I know many of my colleagues have spoken to as an important part of wildland firefighting. And this is during an active wildfire. In response to this heinous mismanagement of one of the largest wildfires in our state's history, I wrote a letter to the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Homeland Security, and Customs and Border Patrol asking for answers and accountability regarding this incident. The U.S. Forest Service received a copy of this letter. Chief Schultz, I've heard from firefighters across the region who have a series of questions they'd like me to ask you. I understand that the Forest Service was part of this operation along with BLM and CBP. What circumstances could possibly lead your agency to allow the arrest of active duty firefighting crew who are risking their lives in order to protect our communities?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Randall, we recognize the Department of Homeland Security, Customs, Border Patrol has the primary mandate of controlling and guarding the nation's borders. The Forest Service, we support greater federal response to the border crisis, but the Forest Service was not directly involved in that.
Okay, thank you. For safety reasons, fire areas are closed off to everyone except firefighters. This typically involves roadblocks set up by local government officials and land managers. So how did Customs and Border Patrol get into the area? My understanding is that Forest Service is part of the incident management team. Did the leadership of the incident management team work directly with immigration officials to set up this raid?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Randall, I don't know the specifics in terms of what communications were had exactly on that, but I don't have any details to give you in terms of what specific communications were had.
Well, I'm disappointed that you have no clarity to offer the 140 plus firefighters who have been fighting the fire for months and now have concerns about their safety, their rights, their protections. We've heard a lot about the importance of supporting wildland firefighters and our crew, and this is leaving the crew member at the Bear Gulch fire feeling hung out to dry. What directives have the president and his team given you regarding cooperation with immigration operations during active firefighting operations?
We've had no direction, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Randall, directly from the White House on this issue.
About from Homeland Security?
We've had no direct direction.
So in 2021, the Department of Homeland Security released a statement where agencies noted that they would refrain from immigration enforcement at locations where disaster and emergency response and relief is being provided unless there are exigent circumstances. To your knowledge, is this policy still in place?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Randall, I'm not as familiar with the policy as you are.
Thank you, Chief Schultz. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record this September 3rd article from High Country News titled "Firefighters Question Leaders' Role in Ice Raid Near Bear Gulch Fire," and firefighting veterans believe the management team overseeing fire crews played a key role in handing team members over to immigration authorities, as well as my August 29th letter to DHS Secretary Noem, CBP Commissioner Scott, and BLM Acting Director Graffi.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. And I'll recognize Mr. Kennedy from Utah for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening this hearing. And Chief Schultz, thank you for being with us today. I'm grateful for your testimony. As a representative of Utah, I understand the risks of wildfire. According to the Bureau of Land Management, Utah experiences more than 1,000 wildfires a year. Most of these were naturally occurring, and as you mentioned in your testimony, these hurt our communities and endanger our citizens. With nearly 7% of Utah being operated by the U.S. Forest Service, much of the preventative efforts fall on your organization's shoulders. We appreciate the recent efforts made by the administration in terminating the restrictive 2001 Roadless Rule Act. By allowing roads to be constructed to at-risk regions, Utah firefighters will be better equipped to respond with expedience to any wildfires in areas such as the Wasatch Cache National Forest. And with the House passage of the Fix Our Forests Act by our Chairman Westerman, we hope to better equip the Forest Service to be able to better manage our overgrown forests and handle cleanup of hazardous fuels in the near future. Chief Schultz, how do you plan to include state forestry agencies in your reorganization plans?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kennedy, thanks for the question. So we've already been in communication with the National Association of State Foresters, and I'm in regular communication with Jamie Barnes, who is the state forester in Utah. So we have ongoing discussion about budget issues regarding restructuring. We are currently in a public comment period right now that was extended through the end of September. So National State Foresters has submitted comments through that process. And I know Utah is represented in that process.
Excellent. So you are working with the National Association of State Foresters in reorganization, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. In addition, Chief, how will greater vehicular access aid our firefighters in combating forest fires?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kennedy, we've had a lot of discussion on statistics with regard to roadless. You mentioned rightly so that in Utah, of the 8 million acres of national forest, it's about almost a little over 50% of that is currently in roadless. So the expectation is that when we open some of that up, we are going to have more access, whether it's for recreation, whether it's for timber management, whether it's to protect communities. When we look nationally, there's over 24.5 million acres that are either in the WUI. We talked a lot about WUI and the importance of managing the WUI, that are either within the roadless areas or within a mile of those areas. So the notion that we need to manage these areas is absolutely true to protect communities. So we expect that the roadless rule, when it is implemented under this new process we're going through, will provide additional access for both fire management, recreation, and timber management in those areas.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. And what steps is the U.S. Forest Service taking to actively clean our forests of hazardous fuels?
So every year, we treat different acres. I've got some numbers for Utah just in anticipation of maybe this question. So over the last 5 years, we've treated about 530,000 acres in Utah. So we're averaging just over 100,000 acres a year in fuels reduction treatments. And that varies by state and by region. But we are actively working to do this both with mechanical treatments, prescribed fire, are our two main areas how we treat the forest in that fashion.
Can you tell me about your mechanical treatments? What does that mean?
And mechanical treatments it's using equipment. It could be a timber sale, it could be fuels reduction, it could be masticators, but it's where we're actually removing trees with equipment mechanically as opposed to using prescribed fire.
And I've been taught or told, and I'm not going to pretend to be a forester, that pine trees consume a lot more water than, for example, what's native to Utah, aspen trees. I don't know if you're an expert in that sort of thing, but removing what can take over, and that's the pine trees, and allowing the native vegetation to grow, the aspen trees may reduce not only water usage, but forest fires. Do you have an opinion about that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a potential. I think in general, trees consume, about 50% of a tree is water. So you just think about any tree out there, on average, it's about 50% of that tree is water. So they consume a lot of water.
As do humans. Actually, about 60% of us, 60% of humans are made of water. So thanks for bringing that up. That's we're not that far off from the trees. Sometimes we can have the intelligence of trees as well. It seems they don't. Anyways, we'll move on from that. Mr. Schultz, final question. How will the U.S. Forest Service pay for the focused efforts to reduce available fuel in our forests?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kennedy, or Mr. Kennedy, a couple things that we use. We have a timber sale budget we actually use to administer timber sales, and in some cases, those sales pay for themselves. And actually in Utah, we're working to be more, working more with the industry down there right now as we speak to put out some more timber sales. I think the other opportunity we have a fuels reduction budget to treat fuels, and that money is about $170 million a year, and that's allocated across the country, targeting these higher priority landscapes where communities are threatened. So we have a base budget to do this work. We also have partners that we work with. It could be in many cases. I was in Colorado Springs last week working with the utility companies, and so Colorado Springs Utilities is investing their own funds to treat national forest lands to protect their assets. So we work with partners as well. We work with the Wild Turkey Federation. We work with Mule Deer Foundation, National Forest Foundation, that are partners with us to treat land. So we have partners that do work with us. We have states. We have good neighbor agreements. The state of Utah has been a tremendous partner working with the states as well. So whether it's the states, whether it's NGOs, whether it's community members, whether it's utilities, but we reach out to everybody to partner with to manage the landscape in a way that we protect communities.
Thank you, Chief Schultz. And if there's any way that I or my state can be of use in helping you in your important task, we would be happy to do that with that. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. A doctor and a forester walk into a bar and ask for water. Sounds like it might be. I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Huffman, for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, I just want to follow up on the questions about the Border Patrol detentions in an active firefighting zone. I've read reports that 44 crew were interrogated, a couple were detained. And I'm just not clear as to the involvement of you and your agency. I mean, you are part of incident command in a project like that, in a setting like that, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, yes. That was a Forest Service fire. In incident command, the team was not a Forest Service team that was there, but we have a liaison as a part of the incident.
And is it your testimony that no one in your agency knew about this or signed off on it?
No, I think the question specifically was, did we authorize that action? Or I think that was the question. So
Yeah, I'm not, I wouldn't think you would authorize it, but I'm wondering, did you know about it?
So the night before, there was a heads up that there was going to be, someone was going to be checking some validation of credentials the night before. Yes, sir.
So you signed off on this Border Patrol enforcement action in an active firefighting project?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, no, there was no signing off. There was a notification. There was no signing off.
Did you or anyone else in the Forest Service object to it? To 44 crew members being held up in the middle of an active firefight so that the Border Patrol can look for people to deport?
I'm unaware of any objections.
Does it trouble you? I mean, is that something that you want to see in active firefights on your watch?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, currently those were contract crews, and there's a requirement in our contracts that everyone who is contracted with is supposed to be doing that validation. The Forest Service does not validate those crew members.
That's not my question. I mean, there are ways to do that validation that don't disrupt an active firefight. My question is, how do you feel about Border Patrol or ICE or anyone else doing immigration enforcement in the middle of an active firefight on your land under your watch? Is that a good idea?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, what I can tell you is that the responsibility for that action is a border security issue.
That's not my question, Mr. Chief. With all due respect, I'm asking how you feel about it. Is that something you want to see Border Patrol or ICE doing on your land, on your watch, in the middle of an active firefight? And it's a pretty straightforward question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, that's something that we want to continue communication on how those actions are taken.
Will you object to this going forward in the future?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, what I would need to do is learn more about their goals, and we would need to have more discussion about this. But I'm not going to say emphatically that I would object or that I wouldn't object. I don't have enough information.
You don't have a position on whether it's a good idea or
I
not.
don't have a position.
Are you worried that it will impact people's willingness to work on fighting fires?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, I think a couple things. One, when it comes to Forest Service employees, we validate everybody who works for the agency. So I don't anticipate there being any issues. And when it comes to contract crews, there already is a requirement in our contracts that people be validated by their employer.
You don't think there's any risk of a chilling effect when dozens of people are pulled out of a firefight and interrogated by Border Patrol or other law enforcement? You don't think that has a chilling effect on people's participation as firefighters?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, I'm not going to speculate on what people might feel or not feel.
All right, Chief. I want to ask you another question about firefighters. And the ranking member asked you a bit about the problem of smoke inhalation and health effects. When firefighters get sick, they can file for compensation and coverage of health care costs through the Department of Labor under the Federal Employees Compensation Act, right? That's your understanding? I'm interested in processing times. Can you assure me that processing times for those claims have not gone up under this administration because of all the chaos and the staff purges and the funding cuts? That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, I do not have an answer to your question. We'll have to follow up with you on that one with your staff.
All right. I will look forward to that. We talked about the New York Times piece. Chief, do you feel like the Forest Service is doing everything that it can and should do to make the safety risk of smoke inhalation known to firefighters? It seems to me, we can quibble about who was interviewed in the Times piece and who wasn't, but it does speak to kind of a broader culture of safety risk among firefighters that it seems to me agencies like yours ought to try to change. Do you feel like you've done everything you can or should do, or is there more work to do?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, I think there's always more work to do. We're never just feel like we're always hanging it out of the park. We're always looking to improve what we're doing and how we're doing it. And safety is something that we take seriously. And we definitely need to continue to focus on safety as we move forward, including this issue.
All right, one last question, Chief. Last year, the Forest Service we talked about treatment, fuels reduction. Last year, they treated 4.2 million acres. How many acres has your agency completed so far this year?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huffman, I think so far to date, it's 2.24 million acres.
All right, thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Hagan.
Thank you. I think it's important that we go back and actually understand what the National Forest Service is and what it manages. First of all, the National Forest is made up of 192 million acres. It was created under the 1897 Organic Act, and it was placed within the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Interior, the very purpose of which was to provide a continuous supply of timber and a continuous supply of water. It was never intended to be treated or to be managed as a national park. It is actually a resource to be used and to be actively managed. And I appreciate the work that you have done, Chief Schultz, in actually carrying out the intent of the Organic Act and the very purpose of our national forests. Right now, there are 36.2 million acres of wilderness within our national forests and 58.5 million acres of roadless areas, all identified in 2001 under the roadless rule. The roadless rule at the time was the largest rulemaking in U.S. history. It was not adopted by Congress. It was adopted by the National Forest Service and Bill Clinton at the time. What was interesting is I've actually looked at the administrative record associated with that. And one of the largest group of comments that was opposed to the roadless rule were National Forest Service employees. And the reason was because they recognized what was going to happen to our national forests if the roadless rule was actually adopted. And you can find literally hundreds, if not thousands, of comments submitted by Forest Service employees saying, please, do not adopt the roadless rule. It will make it impossible for us to actually manage this resource. Interestingly enough, in defending the roadless rule, there was a U.S. attorney that argued in court recognizing that the roadless rule was going to be ecologically devastating. I'll repeat that, ecologically devastating to our national forests. But it was more important to have a one-size-fits-all rule coming out of Washington, D.C. than it was to have what had historically been done, which was that roadless areas were identified and managed pursuant to individual forest management plans. I would say that her statements were the understatement of the century. Since 2001 and the adoption of the roadless rule, we have seen catastrophic forest fires that have been absolutely off the charts. The insect infestation has been exactly what was predicted by the GAO reports and the Forest Service employees at the time. Right now in Wyoming, we have a fire in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. I was up there a couple of weeks ago, and as I drove through the day before that fire started, I thought, man, if the fire ever starts in this area, it's going to be an absolute conflagration just looking at the density of the Bridger-Teton National Forest. When I drove back through 2 days later, I almost couldn't see because there was so much smoke. That forest fire has been absolutely devastating, burning and scorching tens of thousands of acres because the Bridger-Teton National Forest has not been properly managed for years. We have escalating housing costs because of a lack of lumber and timber. We don't produce domestically produced timber anymore, hardly, because of the roadless rule and the way that our national forests have been managed. We have reduced runoff. As you indicate, about 50% of a tree is made up of water. They consume hundreds of gallons of water every single day, which impacts the water that we have available for our municipalities. Why am I describing all of this? Because I've been listening with great interest today. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And as I hear the Forest Service being criticized, your management being criticized, the criticism of the idea of repealing the roadless rule, I just cannot imagine the fact that the people who are responsible for the problems that we're facing right now are actually criticizing you for attempting to fix it. I commend you for having the strength of character and being willing to revisit the roadless rule, recognize that roadless areas should be managed pursuant to individual Forest Service plans or forest management plans, and that we must do a better job of managing this resource rather than watching it burn to the ground every year and watch as insects completely destroy this incredibly valuable resource. I just want to ask you, have you identified as part of this process those areas that are at the highest risk of wildfire, and how do they overlap with roadless areas?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Hageman, thank you for the question. So we have insect and disease information that we collect nationally, and we just actually updated that. We update it every year, but it was just updated over the last 5 years with data sets. So we know where those insect and disease areas are. We also model where we have high, very high, moderate risk of wildfire. So we can see that on maps where that is. In terms of the impact of roadless, typically what we see in the roadless areas, since those areas historically have not been managed, insect and disease rates are higher. And then we typically have more downed woody debris. I mean, if you've hiked and recreated in wilderness areas, it's not uncommon to see a lot of down material, and it's not removed. So it's not uncommon that we see those conditions in roadless and wilderness areas.
So the Forest Service employees who warned us about this 25 years ago were absolutely correct, weren't they?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Hageman, I think they were correct. And they were trying to maintain flexibility, management flexibility. And as you said, I think the rightful place to make those determinations is in that local forest plan with public input at that level.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields, and I'll recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry, for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Schultz, thank you so much for being here today. I was interested as I was reading your bio with your background. It sounds like you studied silviculture and watershed management and worked in private forestry for the Idaho Forest Group for a number of years. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So my background is also in watershed management. I've worked in interdisciplinary science and water resources planning most of my career. And I always find these conversations here in this committee interesting because sometimes they're a little bit divorced from science. And so since I know this is an area that you've studied and an area that you've worked in your whole career, I just want to follow up. You know, there's been a lot of discussion, and I agree wholeheartedly with the chairman that our forests are in really bad shape. And we know that's for a number of reasons. It's due to fire suppression and a number of different things. But in general, we know that most of the load of hazardous fuels in our forests are small diameter trees. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Stansbury, yes, a lot of that it's biomass, right? It's small diameter trees, it's brush, a lot of that is the fuels. Yes, ma'am.
And since you worked in private forestry, you know that small diameter is really difficult to turn into timber products. In fact, you work for a company that was in the timber product industry. And in New Mexico, it's a big problem for us, right? Because we have a lot of mills that have gone out of business, but there's also not a lot of large timber trees left. And we need to deal with hazardous fuel loads to deal with a fire hazard, but it's really difficult to get these small diameter fuel loads to market to be beneficial timber products. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. We actually just announced yesterday we have about a $23 million in grants that we provided, the Forest Service did, to contractors to help remove some of that small material from the forest, because you're right, it's 30 to 35 bucks a ton to move it out in many cases, and it doesn't pay its way out of the woods in many instances.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chief. I hope that I never see that chart in this committee again that keeps getting recycled over and over again, claiming that the reason we have fires on our Forest Service lands is because we haven't been doing large timber harvest. Your own chief just said that's not the case.
So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Sten, just to clarify real quick, so when we do timber harvest, though, keep in mind, it removes not just saw logs, we remove non-saw material as well.
I agree,
Okay.
but that's not what the chart is all about, that they keep recycling over and over again. Thank you for your expertise on that. The second question I have for you is about support, since you were in private forestry, and I also understand from your bio that you worked in partnership with Montana and Idaho state foresters as well. Would you agree that our private and tribal and state forestry programs are really important collaborative programs to manage our forests?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Stansbury, yes, I would agree that those are important relationships and dialogue that we have with those folks on a regular basis.
Can I ask you just honestly, did you help draft the budget for the Forest Service this year?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Stansbury, you know, the agency provides feedback into the budgeing process, so
But
yes, I
did
did.
you personally put your fingerprint on this budget?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Stansbury, and the way the process works is we are provided a draft, we provide feedback and comment to that. And short of objections to anything in the budget, we're on board with the budget. So I am supportive of the President's budget.
I understand, and just so you're aware, I used to work at OMB, so I'm very aware about how the budget gets drafted, and I know you came in this spring and weren't there from the get-go, but as I understand your answer, and I know that as a political appointee you have to answer as you have to answer, but I take that to mean that you were handed a draft and you didn't put your thumbprint on this specific budget. And that's elucidating to me because literally this budget eliminates the state private and tribal forestry program. And so I can't comprehend how somebody who thinks these programs is important would zero out that program. And I'll just say in New Mexico, I know there's been a lot of argument and back and forth here in this committee this morning. The federal workforce in the Forest Service in New Mexico is understaffed, underpaid, underappreciated, and they're not able to do their jobs right now. I can tell listening to you that you're a leader who cares and that you care about this industry. And I hope that in your time in service here in the federal government, you'll help to rebuild the workforce that we need and support the folks in the field who we absolutely need to carry out all the missions of the Forest Service. So thank you for your time, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Stenberg, I'll just comment on that real quick. So I have spent the better part of the last 5 months traveling the country, meeting with employees all over the country. I was in Colorado Springs last week. I've been to Alaska. I've been to Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. This notion that somehow we aren't supporting employees is not accurate, just so we're clear for the record. We are supporting employees. There has been reductions, as been stated, but it's also because we had to balance our budget. There was an opening comment about a $750 million hole, which is true. We walked into that. So there have been efforts that we have put in place. But what we're doing, just so the committee is clear on this, there are the administrative bureaucracy that we have created within the Forest Service. It called last 5, 10, 20 years. You go back. We are focusing on readdressing how we're staffed with what positions. So our focus is the people that are on the ground doing the work. If we have mid-level management positions, we're looking to put those folks on the ground doing the work of the public. So we have 30,000 employees. I just want people to realize we have 30,000 employees in the Forest Service right now. So to suggest that we don't have enough, I take umbrage with that. And what I would say is that any one office that you talk to, which I talk to a lot of offices, and I do hear anxieties. People are anxious about what has happened. They're worried about doing their work. But we also have to look at how do we reform the process that we do our work, and how do we make sure that the people on the ground are supported with the right level of staffing. It might be we have to move someone from a mid-level management position to doing the work on the ground. And that's the piece that we're going through right now.
Mr. Chairman, may I just respond quickly since this is specific to New Mexico? I would love to invite you to New Mexico to come meet with our forestry folks. That would be very, very helpful. I understand your overall mission, but you all have lost over 4,000 people who took the deferred retirement and 3,000 people were doged, and there is still a culture of fear in the rank and file on the ground. You may not feel that at your level, but they are telling us that when we're out in the field. So I hope you'll take that to heart because your employees need you to be a good leader for them.
Gentlelady yields. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter a couple articles in the record. First, an announcement from Forest Service Chief Randy Moore from September 2024 saying that the agency was freezing all non-fire hiring due to budgetary constraints. Second, an article from ProPublica in August of last year saying the Forest Service fire ranks were badly depleted, both reflecting before this administration came into office in January of 2025. With that, I recognize the chairman for 5 minutes for his questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany. Thank you, Chief Schultz, again for being here today. If you look back historically over the past 3 or 4 decades, we saw things like the roadless rule in the West and weaponization of the Endangered Species Act result in closures of many mills in the western U.S. As a result of that, we saw increased imports from Canada. We saw no forest management on many of these stands out west, and now we're seeing catastrophic wildfires. Now, I know the chart that was referred to, it's just data. It shows how much was harvested over time, and it shows how many wildfires we've had. And we also know that correlation doesn't mean causation, but I think I could explain why there's actually causation to the correlation. I just want to give you a minute to explain why you think there is or is not causation with the correlation on the chart, if you want to hold the chart back up.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Westerman, thank you for the question. So I think if you look at what happened, if you go back to the late 80s, the Forest Service was harvesting about 12 billion board feet a year. And then the spotted owl decision came out right around that time, 88, 89, and you see a precipitous decline in timber that was offered. And there was about an 80% reduction. So we have to keep in mind when we talk about timber sales on the National Forest, I made the comment a minute ago, it's not just saw log removal. When you look at any timber sale contract that the Forest Service offers, especially if it's a stewardship contract, there is a tremendous amount of work that is done, including removal of non-saw material as a part of those contracts. So the work that was being done when we look at those timber harvest numbers was not just removal of saw logs walking past all this other material. There was, whether it was burned, whether it was brought out of the forest, but there was a lot of other forest management that was occurring in addition to saw log removal that did, I would argue that it did have an impact on the fires. And the other thing you got to keep in mind, when you have active management going on, you have contractors in the woods. People tend to forget this. Logging contractors in many cases can be first responders. So they're the first ones to see a smoke out there, and in many cases, if they have a timber sale contract, their contract requires that they put the fire out if they're somehow in their vicinity of their timber sale unit. So having people on the landscape, it's kind of like having ranchers that have permits on Forest Service ground or BLM ground. If there's a fire, those ranchers, having that person on the landscape is going to be much more effective in putting that fire out than not having people in the landscape. So I would argue that a couple things. One, that overall forest management and reducing fuel loads and reducing the overall sawlog volume, both of those things contributed to some of that. And then what you see happen is that we have this precipitous decline, and we're down to roughly 2.5 to 3 billion board feet from a 12 billion board foot harvest level. And we can argue, was 12 the right number? But I would argue that the level we're at right now, we need to do more to protect our communities, and both from a wildfire mitigation perspective as well as in terms of rebuilding some of the infrastructure in the rural communities that we have.
And from a forest dynamic standpoint, we can't forget that a forest fire acts as a clear cut. So what grows back is going to be an even age stem where everything's the same diameter, and if it doesn't have room to grow, it's going to remain a small diameter and be subject to insects and disease attack. So the need to get in and manage the forest is critical. But as I said earlier, we got into a bit of a death spiral where we took the ability to manage away, we took the markets away, and now we can't get, if we could manage, there's nothing to do with the material because the mills are gone. In the reconciliation bill, we put a 20-year stewardship contract provision in. Can you explain how that could help draw industry back so that people would invest in mills, whether it be to process biomass or to process larger diameter?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Westerman, a couple things to think about. I don't care what business you're in. What you want from government is certainty, right? And if you're a regulator, you want regulatory certainty. If in the business of the Forest Service, we're providing supply, industry needs certainty. The Forest Service needs to do what we say we're going to do. So what a 20-year timber sale contract does, it provides certainty. And with certainty comes deployment of capital, right? If you have certainty of supply, and if you're in the wood products industry, that is problem number one. You have to demonstrate you have certainty of supply. Without that, you're not going to make that investment. So whether you're investing in an existing mill or an existing facility, trying to expand that, you might add a second line, you might upgrade the line, or if you're looking to attract new capital into an area, if people know that there's not just supply, but there's certainty of that, bringing that supply to market is going to be key. It's not a panacea, right? That we know there's other things that affect markets. There's trade policies and different things, but I would argue that if the Forest Service provides certainty of supply, that will encourage investment in some areas, or it will continue the investment that has occurred.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Dexter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today, Chief Schultz. As a pulmonologist, I've spent nearly 2 decades treating patients, many of whom are firefighters suffering from cancer, heart disease, and lung damage due to exposure to smoke. Wildfire smoke isn't just smoke. It contains more than 30 carcinogens, fine particulates, and toxic chemicals. And I've seen firsthand the impact it has on firefighters. So Chief Schultz, do you agree that exposure to wildfire smoke as a firefighter can be permanently debilitating? Yes or no, please?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dexter, I'm not a pulmonologist. You are much more informed than I am. Based on what I've read, I would assume that, but I'm a layperson on this issue, so I'm not an expert by any means.
I agree with you. The answer is yes. And do you agree that exposure to wildfire smoke as a firefighter can be lethal? Yes or no?
Again, I'm not an expert on this issue, but from what my understanding is, it could be.
Thank you. So one clear evidence-based solution is respiratory protection and high-quality masks. And I understand that you have said that N95 masks are available to all wildland firefighters. My question today is, do you encourage the use of those masks to mitigate the risk to the firefighters of smoke exposure?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dexter, we make them available on a fire. What I think you find is that there's personal preference. Can we do a better job? We probably can do a better job, but it's no different than when folks were wearing masks during the COVID time. Some people find it hard to breathe. If they wear glasses, their glasses get fogged up. Keep in mind, if you're on a wildfire, it could be over 100 degrees, it could be 80, 90% humidity. So having a mask on can impair your ability to do work. We aren't precluding folks from wearing those. We're making them available to them. But there's issues, just physical issues of wearing a mask when you're working like that.
Totally. And I've taken care of folks for 20 years. This goes back to before structural firefighters wore respirators. They didn't think they should use them either, and now they do because they understand it saves their life. So you have said very clearly that they're that they're available. I have not heard that they are recommended. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman.
Just again, yes or no,
Dexter?
because I do want to get to another question.
I think we're still trying to make that determination. Would we recommend it? But we're making them available to individual firefighters.
And the reason I ask is there's multiple wildland firefighter studies. Happy to submit those into the record. I'd like to, suggesting this is a dose response. And this should be in the highest load areas, not at the camps, but when they are fighting fires. And there are ways to mitigate that. Understood about the discomfort, and that is something that needs to be studied. Chief Schultz, you also received a letter from myself and some of my colleagues this week asking for a briefing on this because obviously my time is much shorter than I would like. And as somebody who wants to protect our firefighters and also, frankly, protect our federal government from liability for continuing to send people into workplaces that are hazardous to their health knowingly, I would like to understand where the Forest Service sits on that. Will you agree or commit to a briefing with us, members of this committee, before the end of September?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dexter, what I will commit to is that we will work with the committee. I can't commit to that by the end of September for sure, but we will definitely work with you and the committee on this issue. We take it very seriously. One other point to point out is there is no OSHA-approved respirator for wildland firefighting. So that's something that we want to work, and we have worked with OSHA for years on this issue, but there's more science and more data that we need to collect. But we would welcome working with you and the committee on this issue. We want to improve the health and safety of our wildfires.
I absolutely appreciate that, and I have here a 1992 report from the Yellowstone fires where they suggested investigations after what was a very hazardous smoke exposure. For 25 years, we have been failing to track the long-term health of wildland firefighters. So I appreciate that intent, but we've got to start collecting the data and looking at the mitigation of different types of masks and the actual impact on health. So I appreciate that, but I would just once again ask, can I expect a briefing from you, with you, not just working together, but an actual sit-down ability to have a discussion about this? Because truly, it is firefighter health for both of us that I think we want to work towards. And as somebody who's done this, I'm the first and only pulmonary and critical care doctor ever to serve in Congress. I would like to use my knowledge to help protect our firefighters.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dexter, if this committee requests that I do that, I will more than welcome to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm requesting, and I'm asking, will you commit to that?
Yeah, if you would like me to sit down with you personally, we could do that. Yes,
Great.
ma'am.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Does the gentlelady wish to have that information entered into the record?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. So we have a wildland firefighter smoke exposure and risk of lung cancer and cardiovascular mortality study I'd like to submit, as well as the 1992 study from the Yellowstone
I'd
fires.
ask for unanimous consent to
I do ask for unanimous
so
consent.
ordered.
Thank you.
I
very
now
much.
recognize Ms. Lee from Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Schultz, thank you for being here. Together with my colleagues and Ranking Member Neguse, I've worked and fought for years to secure the bipartisan pay fix for our federal wildland firefighters that we finally passed earlier this year. And I'm hearing, however, as with any new law or any new passage, that there's some tweaks that we might need to address. And several of these firefighters, however, reported that the Forest Service is lagging behind the Department of Interior in implementing a fair approach to overtime pay. As I understand it, the Forest Service currently classifies a broader range of firefighters as FLSA exempt. even though their duties clearly are frontline operational. This is leading to situations where many of your agency's firefighters, let's say a GS-8 engine captains, are performing essentially the same non-exempt duties as their interior counterparts, but they're being treated as exempt, and as a result, they and their families are losing out on significant overtime earnings during peak fire season. So my first question is pretty simple, Chief. As the chief, can you commit to working to correct this discrepancy and ensuring that Forest Service firefighters aren't being paid less than their counterparts simply because they report to you instead of the Interior Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lee, I'm not aware of this issue, so before I commit to something, I need to understand the issue. So let us look into this and we'll get back to you directly.
Great, thank you. I appreciate for your willingness to look into this. I've also heard concerns regarding how the Forest Service is implementing the Incident Response Premium Pay, IRPP, which was codified as part of this pay fix. It was a bipartisan pay fix. And this fix specified that an incident qualifies as IRPP if it has not been contained within 36 hours. However, there seems to be a question within the agency as to whether this IRPP should be provided to firefighters starting only after they've been out for 36 hours mark or at the very beginning of the incident, once the 36-hour threshold is met. My understanding, Chief, is that the Forest Service is currently interpreting the pay fix, this provision, in the way that it is less generous to our men and women in uniform. Do you have an understanding? Is this accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lee, I need to look into this as well and get back to you on this.
Okay, so I just hope that you look into that. If you find that this is happening, I think the intent of the pay fix was to understand that these firefighters are under incredible fatigue, and that their fatigue doesn't start after 36 hours, that the pressure on them as firefighters begins when the incident begins, and that we can come to a fix for that. Can I get a commitment from you to take a look into that?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lee, we will definitely look into this and let you know what we find out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Finally, my next question really centers around this administration's mind-boggling cuts to the Forest Service staff of all kinds. And to date, the administration has reportedly cut about 15% of your agency's workforce. And as a retired firefighter with 45 years of experience from Arizona told a reporter earlier this year, quote, "Firefighters cannot be effective without having the planning section supporting them with maps, the finance section paying the bills, and the logistics section getting the water and food out to where they're working." And I've heard this same concern from firefighters in my own office. And so, why should these firefighters, after an already long and hard-fought battle to ensure fairer wages, trust an administration that's actively driving out essential agency staff? And again, we can have a debate on what's essential and non-essential, but I think there is a general concern that the loss of staff in some of these support services is really endangering those men and women who are on the front lines. And so, can we get a commitment that we'll make a attempt to look at this to make sure we're not unduly putting firefighters in harm's way by cutting this type of essential staff?
So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lee, the process we've gone through so far has been primarily through, we call it deferred resignation. It's been voluntary retirements. There were some initial probationary employees let go. Most of those folks came back, and then some took the probationary. They left on DRP after that. What we have done in the meantime is, so anybody who was a firefighter, classified as a firefighter, was not allowed to participate in that DRP program. So no firefighters directly left as a part of that program. What we have been talking about is people that had red cards that left. I think when we've talked about the numbers, it's about 1,400, and of those 1,400, I think we estimated about 350 had actually been on a fire in the last 5 years. And of those folks, 130 of them have come back this season, and many of them are on a fire today. In terms of what we're doing, as we look at, I mentioned earlier that when we had people leave, when it's deferred resignation, it was voluntary. So we did not control where they left or what their job was. So what we have to do now is kind of rebalance things. And that's the piece that I think you're alluding to is how do we make sure we have the right people in the right places given where people left? And right now we have a public comment period on the restructuring. So we're going to be reviewing those comments that we get from the public and anybody that submits that. We're going to be coming back internally, looking at that, looking at what staffing we have. And then we're going to go back to the secretary and make recommendations on what we think we should do in light of how things have shaken out, in light of the public comment. And then the secretary will make a decision on how to proceed.
Great, thank you. And we'll obviously have people participate. Thanks for your service.
Yes, ma'am.
I yield.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Min, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Tiffany. I also want to thank Ranking Member Neguse for convening this hearing and allowing me to waive onto this subcommittee. I represent the heart of Orange County. The Cleveland National Forest abuts my district, and we've had a number of major wildfires in recent years, including the airport fire just last year. Of course, the LA wildfires earlier this year illustrated the severe risks that Southern California faces from our unique wildfire risks, particularly around the time of the Santa Ana winds. And so, of course, wildfire prevention readiness are extremely important to my district and really all of Southern California. Now, in June of this year, this committee asked Secretary Burgum to provide us with the number of red-carded staff at the Department of Interior, including the number that had left the agency due to the administration's reductions in force. We have not gotten answers to that request either at the time or subsequently, as far as I know. So I guess I'll follow up on Ms. Lee's question. According to ProPublica, 1,400 red card employees left your agency due to deferred resignations and other mass layoffs, and 4,500 firefighting positions remain vacant. Is it your contention that those numbers are wrong? Maybe you could quickly walk us through what the numbers actually are.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min. We did have 1,400 red-carded employees that had qualifications to fight fire did leave. And of those, this is the numbers we talked about earlier, about 350 of those had actually been on a fire in the last 5 years. Of those 350, currently 130 of them have come back to the agency to fight fire this year.
Good. Reclaiming my time, how many total Forest Service employees have left the agency?
Since the beginning of the
This year,
DRP
yeah.
and options, it's about 5,200 have left the agency.
Got it. Now, ProPublica also reported that you sent a letter to Forest Service officials raising alarm over staffing concerns and stating that, quote, the demand for resources outpaces their availability. Do you still stand by that statement today?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, I'm not, that statement is not resonating with me, so I'd have to see the statement, but it's not resonating with me.
Do you know how many firefighters the Forest Service needs to hire to meet its growing needs?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, so currently we have 11,300 firefighters that are classified as firefighters GS9 and below. And this year we hired about 11,400. So we were just above our hiring target for this year for firefighters GS9 and below.
Now, earlier this year it was reported that a number of federal employees had their government purchase card limits set to $1 and were otherwise prevented from purchasing certain items that they felt like they needed. Has the Forest Service made any changes to your purchase card program since January 20th of this year?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, yes, we've made changes. As we've learned about the process, we've reduced availability of cards, but we've also maintained the limits that we had the prior year. So we currently have about 4,000 cards that are available to folks for purchasing.
And has this led to any firefighting-related purchases being delayed or not able to be purchased?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, I can't say specifically. I do know early on that that was a concern, so we increased the firefighter card availability by an additional 2,000 cards.
But the limits were still set at $1?
No, these were not set at $1. They were set at whatever the limit needed to be. It could have been 25,000 or 50,000, but we increased the cards by about 2,000 cards here about 8 weeks ago to ensure that as we went into fire season more aggressively, that we had appropriate spending authority for the crews.
Is that something we can get further answer to as to if any purchases have been delayed or not made because of the limits?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, we can look at that and respond back to you.
Got it. Now, in Orange County, as I mentioned, we abut the Cleveland National Forest. And in 2024, a wildfire broke out, growing to 23,000 acres. And the post-diagnostic part of the blame for that is due to the idea that Forest Service ranger stations were unstaffed and that assistance from the Orange County Fire Authority was not taken. Since that time, of course, we've had even greater staffing shortages and cuts to the Forest Service. And I guess my question to you here is district-specific. What are current staffing levels in the Cleveland National Forest?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, I don't have that number in front of me, so we'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay, I would appreciate an answer to that later. Two of the Cleveland National Forest ranger stations, Trabuco Canyon and San Juan, were reportedly unavailable for over 40% of the days in the month of August. And this is obviously a deep concern to us. And I guess my question is related now to the U.S. Department of Ag's proposal to reorganize wildfire agencies, including the complete elimination of the Forest Service's regional offices. Do you believe that this proposed elimination will help or hurt your Forest Service mission?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, we think that the restructuring effort proposed by the Secretary will actually help us make better decisions and drive things down to the local level and better support the public.
I guess my last question, the administration's consolidation plan for fire agencies is September 12th, just a few days from now. We have not learned very much detail about this plan. Can you share with us what this is going to do, and particularly for my region, how firefighters will be affected and how the 3,600 wildland firefighters based in California might be impacted by these proposed closures?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Min, so in terms of the recommendations per the executive order, that will be rolling out later this week. So I don't have anything to add at this point, but you will see information released this week regarding the requirements in the executive order that'll come out. In terms of closures, we aren't closing any forests or any districts on the Cleveland Forest, so there are no closures there. In terms of what we are looking at doing is over the course of the next 8 to 12 months, looking at the regional offices and how best to structure those.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chief Schultz, I'm the last one. I mentioned in the E&E article in my opening statement, it highlighted that the Biden administration, which there were enormous amounts of money allocated beyond base a few years ago, and yet you were left with a $750 million budget shortfall. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Also, I'd like to enter into the record a report from USDA's Inspector General that found the Forest Service exceeded a limit on administrative expenses for the community wildfire defense grants by $37 million. Without objection, so ordered. So think about it. This was put in place a few years ago, this community wildfire defense grants. And the Inspector General found that the money that was supposed to be going to the front line to fight fire was being diverted to Washington, D.C. Have you had any wildfires here in Washington? Do you know of any wildfires in Washington, D.C. in the last few years?
No, sir.
Yeah, being diverted away from where it should. So Chief Schultz, the question for me is, what state did you find the Forest Service budget when you came into office?
Mr. Chairman, the budget, as you've indicated previously, was in the hole about $750 million. So in addition to the hiring freeze that was in place, and we did not hire seasonals, the reductions that have taken place, this is the piece we haven't talked about, the 5,200 people that have left on a voluntary on a basis, that is necessary for us to meet and be fiscally responsible and manage within our budget. And if you look at the Secretary, as a part of the restructuring effort, her first principle that she identified was that the workforce aligns with our federal resources. So when you think about what we're trying to achieve as a part of this restructuring effort is to make sure that we are managing our workforce within the budget that we have, as opposed to saying we have this many people. We need to look at the budget we have and administer that budget in a way that's fiscally responsible pursuant to federal law. So that's what's driving what we're doing.
And yet you've been largely able to manage wildfire this season. Isn't that correct? I listened to Mr. Bentz from Oregon. He commented about he has firefighters asking for work. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would say we have had adequate resources this season to fight the wildfires. Yes, sir.
What effect do frivolous lawsuits have on the work that the Forest Service does?
Mr. Chairman, it has a significant impact on our timber sale programs, and it can affect other programs as well. At Region 1, for instance, we have over 300 million board feet that is tied up in litigation, and there's another 200 million feet that is at threat of litigation. So it definitely impairs things. Not only does it slow things down in the courts, but it also makes managers more risk averse, and they end up doing more review and creating longer documents, taking longer time to get decisions made in anticipation of things going to court. So I would argue that litigation has a significant impact on the work that we do.
I have information that there's 3 environmental NGOs at present who are responsible for nearly half of the forest management lawsuits. Does that sound about right?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the information for anybody. I can't dispute it. I don't know those numbers.
3 environmental NGOs. Should Congress consider some reforms like the Equal Access to Justice Act to stop these frivolous lawsuits?
Now, Mr. Chairman, that's been discussed for years, and I think that's something that would definitely warrant greater discussion with Congress. I mean, it's been discussed for many years.
Finally, in regards to access, gentlelady from Wyoming talked about that, and is access to our national forests a priority for you?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. When you think about how people know the national forest system, it's primarily through recreation. And having access to those, whether they like to hike, whether they fish, whether they hunt, whether they use motorized vehicles or equestrians, it's a significant part of what we do. And it's looking at not just acquiring new access, but opening up access to the lands that we currently manage.
And that is why the roadless rule is being reviewed. Is that accurate?
That's a part of what we're looking at, yes, sir, is opening up access. That's correct.
I appreciate that very much. I would urge you at some point to look at back when I was in the state legislature, we did a study, a peer-reviewed study called the Forest Practices Study. It was managed by the Great Lakes Timber Professionals in Wisconsin. And I would urge you to take a look at that. While it focused on state land and the reduction in harvest and value to the taxpayers of the state of Wisconsin on some state-managed properties, I extrapolated that study to national forest lands, of which we have 1.5 million acres in Wisconsin, right? The Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. By the way, have you learned how to spell Chequamegon-Nicolet yet?
It's got a Q in there.
Yeah, there's a Q in there. And but I extrapolated that study to the Forest Service, and I believe that over the course of 30 years, once we saw this management regime that became preservation rather than management after 1988, that it actually had cost the federal government, the state of Wisconsin, and the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest specifically, $250 million in value. And this forest practices study was really good because we had a company come in and do a rendition of an alternate harvest, and we showed it to people and said, can you tell the difference between the 2 harvests? They could not, yet there was millions of dollars of value that was brought out, even though it did not look like the management was much different in terms of how the public would view it. If you get a chance, I'm sure you can find a person that would share that information with you. I think you would find it quite interesting. So with that, my time has expired, and I want to thank you so much, Chief Schultz, for taking the time today to answer these questions and for reaching out to members on both sides of the dais with information. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you today, and we will ask that the witnesses respond, or that you respond to those in writing. On Committee Rule 3, members of the subcommittee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, September 12th, 2025. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for your responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the Subcommittee on Federal Lands stands adjourned.